Welcome to the Lock Shop with Nielsen and Hustler, powered by Coolbet Canada.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Tuesday episode of the Fantasy Football Extravaganza, brought to you by The Lock Shop, and of course, presented to you by our wonderful partners over at Coolbet. Sign up for an account today. Tons of NFL futures bets just sitting there waiting for you at Coolbet. When you do sign up, use the code LOCKSHOP, and you get a deposit bonus on your initial deposit up to $200. Huss, happy Fantasy Tuesday. How are you, my man?
Dude, I am great. It's been a super busy day. By the way, gang, if you missed it earlier, hot in the CFL. The picks are up. We did a lock shop earlier today with our normal CFL wagers, a few other ones. But yes, now, Fantasy Football Extravaganza, get into the wide receivers. We'll touch on tight ends. And this is perfect prep because I've got my big dynasty auction a little later on tonight. And, man, this next week, this is when you really get into draft.
Oh,
time.
yeah.
We've got tomorrow one with the boys from the bar down the street and a couple next week. So I don't know. These honestly are two of my favorite weeks of the entire year. I'm looking forward to the season starting, but I don't mind the week and a half leading up to it with the draft a day pretty much for those of us that are really into it.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing. I've got one on the first, the second. I've got one on the third. That's a live big one here, local, with a bunch of buddies. I have to travel that day. Don't tell anybody. In that draft last year, they had scheduled it right while I was calling a CFL game on the Sunday, and I did the draft while I was calling the CFL game on TSN. And not only did I do the draft, buddy, I pulled the trigger on a trade during the draft while I was calling the game. So they were patient with me. I mean, obviously they were all together up here in the garage doing the draft, and I was calling it. But yeah, I was wheeling and dealing, man. It was a good draft. I sat down at the end and I was pretty happy with it. I was happy with the broadcast, obviously, too. But I sat down, I was like, you know what? That's not a bad draft for doing national television at the same time. So it was pretty good.
Yeah, well, listen, if you're in a league with Dustin Nielsen, do not schedule the draft during a CFL game. And if you want me to MC your wedding, kindly don't schedule it during the Labor Day Classic. It's a whole nother story.
Which is just unbelievable.
Shout out to everyone in Regina. Have one for me this weekend. I'll miss you all.
Hey, you're a good friend. You're a good friend, Huss. All right, before we get into the wide receiver position preview, just quickly, I want to give you one more shot to get into the Fantasy Football Extravaganza Listener League. It'll be with the two of us, so we need 10 of you. I will tell you right now, we've already had well beyond 10 applicants, but I will sit down probably on Thursday, sort through them. You'll get an invite. I've had people going full Keanu Reeves quotes on me. The entire thing was like one big Keanu Reeves quote. I was just like, oh, this guy gets me. This guy gets me. So get creative with it. You can either slide into my DMs on Twitter at NielsenTSN1260, or you can email dnielsenmedia, that's DNIELSON media at gmail.com, and explain to us why you deserve a very coveted spot in the Listener League that we're going to try to schedule a draft for around this time next week. And we will record a podcast while we're doing a draft, and it should be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think we sort of figured it out that basically this time next week, we're going to shoot for 6 o'clock next Tuesday, or 6 o'clock our time. I guess that's 5 o'clock in Edmonton. We'll obviously be doing it online, but it'll be a great way to, see what happens with all the Lock Shop and FFE listeners and viewers coming in. And I'm really looking forward to it. So folks, put your best foot forward. Shout out to the guy that used the Keanu Reeves quotes to get through to you. That's almost, he is treating you in this situation like you do the listeners with your patronizing picks each and every Nielsen Show draft, which obviously works out quite well for you.
It does okay. I mean, let's just say I know how to draft. That's just how it works. It's one of the things that I do well. So, I haven't locked in the spots yet, but let's just say Keanu Reeves quote guy, closing in on one of those 10 spots. We'll leave that one out there. But once again, one more time, slide in my DMs at Nielsen TSN 1260 on Twitter or dnielsenmedia@gmail.com. Yeah.
I was just about to say, this is going to be good. Put your best foot forward. Get those final pushes in to get into the league. And you know what? I'm sure between the two of us, we can make sure that we can maybe get some nice prizing, maybe a little something from our friends at CoolBet for the league as well. But major bragging rights only. Did you win this league last year?
No, my neighbor did actually across the street. He ended up winning it last year. Yeah, he had a good one. He's in one of my dynasty leagues too, and he won that one as well. So I presented him with his ring. I will once again do another championship ring from our partners at Legends Rings. Yeah, they're sick.
Amazing.
So yeah, that's gonna be right up there too. So that should be pretty fun. I do have a quick fantasy football confession before we get to top wide receivers, and I feel, to be honest with you, I legitimately feel awful about this because I went on Twitter and I saw some people like having fun with it. I was just like, I probably shouldn't be doing that, and I knew I shouldn't even. But when Brian Robinson Jr. got shot, the first thing that went through my mind was, oh man, now what do I keep Antonio Gibson? And I was just like, damn it, dude. Like, I can't get out of that. And then immediately I was like, shit, I hope Brian Robinson's okay. But it's just that fantasy football. If you go online and look at some of the replies, I mean, some people are just hammering it. And it looks like he's going to be okay. He's been released and everything, but a scary situation. But yeah, the first thing that crossed my mind was like, shit, do I have to keep Antonio Gibson now? Because I was planning on cutting him. So I'm not proud of myself. That's when fantasy football maybe goes too far, buddy.
That's a definite legit confession.
Yes. I know. I was just like, damn it. But
listen, I'm guilty of that as well. I've got a Gibson as a keeper in a couple leagues. My running backs suck. And, once I found out that Brian Robinson was going to be okay and that it wasn't serious and they were good, I did make a mental note that Antonio Gibson stock has gone up a little bit because he'd been falling quite a bit through it. So hopefully nobody else's fantasy status will be affected by carjackings or shootings over the course of this NFL season. We can all agree on that.
Yeah, unless, of course, it's self-inflicted and it's hilarious when it's shoot yourself in your leg. That's that's a little different. Shout out to Plaxico Burris. All right, let's. I can't even imagine having him in fantasy when he shot himself in the leg. God. All right. Hey, speaking of wide receivers, let's get into it. I got my top 20 wide receivers for you tonight. We're going to take a look at this list. We're going to break it down a little bit. We got some my guys, some sleepers. We're going to dabble on some tight ends here as well. Kind of got those broken into a few tiers. So we'll hit that in this episode. And then, like I said, next week's episode of the Lock Shop's Fantasy Football Extravaganza, if we can make it work, and I'm pretty sure we'll be able to, we will record an episode of our live draft that we'll be doing for the podcast league. So that should be pretty fun. Here's what I've got. Here we go. Let's run you through the top 20. Then Huss can kind of drill into this a little bit. If you're watching right now and you have any questions, feel free to fire them over. And we'll give you some answers on that as well as many as we can get to. So if you're watching on the live stream, make first of all you subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. But at the same time, feel free to ask some questions as well. Here we go. Justin Jefferson at the top of my list. I love him. I've been taking him as high as 4th overall in some drafts this year. I really like Justin Jefferson. Cooper Kupp, also a first-round talent. And then I'm going with Stephon Diggs, one spot ahead of Jamar Chase. I think most spots you look, Jamar Chase is probably ahead of Stephon Diggs. Mind you, in many places you look, they are 3 and 4. Maybe I'm just a little bit higher on Diggs. Not that I'm anti-Chase, but I'm a little bit higher on Diggs having a bounce-back year in that Buffalo offense. Devontae Adams, new setting, but a great relationship with his quarterback there, so I've still got him at 5. CeeDee Lamb, I've been a CeeDee Lamb truther since the moment he stepped in to the National Football League, and it frustrated me for so many years being like, oh, they're giving it to Amari Cooper. Oh, they're giving it to Michael Gallup. Oh, they're giving it to Cedric Wilson. Well, Amari Cooper's gone, Michael Gallup's hurt, and Cedric Wilson's not around anymore. So, like, almost by process of elimination, it's like in Moneyball when Brad Pitt traded guys just to force the manager to do what he wants. I feel like this is what it is. Jerry Jones is like, throw the ball to CeeDee Lamb. So gets Dak back. He's healthy. I like CeeDee Lamb at 6. Mike Evans at 7. Touchdown machine there with Tom Brady. Michael Pittman Jr., as far as the overall skill package goes, he's a phenomenal talent. There's not much else there. He's now got a quarterback that can actually pass the football in Matt Ryan. So I think there's another step in the right direction for Pittman this year. I've got him at 8, Tyreek Hill at 9, Keenan Allen at 10, and then 11 through 20 as follows. Deebo Samuel, obviously a phenomenal year last year for Deebo. Can he do that again? Will they use him like that again? I would think they will. I'm not sure if he can put together another year like the one he had. Mike Williams was phenomenal prior to getting banged up last year. If there's one quarterback that can support 2 wide receivers in the top 10, it's probably Justin Herbert. And then 13 through 20, Cortland Sutton, T. Higgins, A.J. Brown, DJ Moore, Brandon Cooks, who's still probably the most disrespected fantasy receiver going, Terry McLaurin. I might be a little bit higher on Scary Terry, but he's been one of my guys for years now. Still don't necessarily love his quarterback situation, but he is a phenomenal talent. And then I've got Allen Robinson landing with the Rams. I think he's in a juicy spot to have a nice year. And I will go Deontay Johnson, but there's a bunch of other guys I could easily flip-flop into those 19 and 20 spots. So, Huss, that's wide receivers 1 through 20. Went a little bit deeper on the wide receivers than the 18 running backs. It's simply a deeper position. I mean, I love receivers all the way down into like the 40s and 50s of these wide receiver rankings. So that's the top 20, but what jumps off the page for you?
Well, I mean, listen, I love Jefferson at 1. I mean, it's hard to ignore what Cooper Kupp did last year. He had 191 targets leading the league.
Insane.
But Justin Jefferson wasn't far back at 167. I mean, he was WR6 as a rookie, WR4 with an injury in year 2. I think he is set that third year to really have a breakout season. And, Kirk Cousins is going to be feeding him as much as possible. Hard to argue with Kupp. Obviously, I think many people will look and, kind of see a toss-up between Diggs and Chase. The emergence of Gabriel Davis and some of the other skill position players, as well as the running game of Buffalo with Josh Allen, may take a bit of the shine off Diggs, but he's pretty reliable, plays a lot, gets tons of targets. It's interesting, though, with Davante Adams. I think there is the potential that Davante Adams could maybe be even more productive than he was in the Packers offense with Aaron Rodgers. I mean, he had 100? I'm just looking here. He had 169 targets last year. They didn't get him to be a decoy, and they certainly don't have enough other players around them to take enough of the target share away from him. We'll talk about Darren Waller a little bit later on in the tight ends. But, you mentioned the connection that he has with Carr. They're very fond of each other. They're pals, former teammates. As much as I don't want it to happen, I'm preparing myself for a monster year from Davante Adams, and that'll be a big, big shot in the arm for the Raider offense. What's interesting here, I mean, 2 Charger receivers. You mentioned it when you were going down there, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. And hey, listen, if you think Justin Herbert's going to be QB1 or QB2 and pass for 5,000 yards, someone's got to be catching those. And I guess the one big difference is that unlike a team like Kansas City with Travis Kelce, who essentially is their number 1 wide receiver, just playing at a different position, they don't have that tight end that's going to take up so much, and it really will be a lot of the wide receivers. So, I mean, whether both of them can actually finish that high, I am somewhat skeptical. And I'm interested, in some drafts, you'll see some people like Williams, maybe even more than Keenan Allen. Hey, they're paying both guys $20+ million each. I heard Brandon, their coach, talk about the fact that, these guys are making that money for a reason, and they're going to get the targets. Tyreek Hill's really interesting. I mean, we'll see what Tua does. Apparently, he's the most accurate quarterback that has ever thrown Tyreek Hill the ball. So obviously, he's going to be great. And, going down the list, guys that, I guess we can kind of sort of go in on guys that, we're higher in or lower on.
Yeah.
I love Terry McLaurin, but I'll be honest, I'm very skeptical at what Carson Wentz does in that offense. And Cortland Sutton, I'm really high on. And maybe this is just the AFC West bias. I think all these teams are going to be awesome. I think Russell Wilson, Jerry Jeudy will be good. I think Cortland Sutton's going to be awesome this season. I could easily see him ending up as a top 10 guy. And I do have a little concerns about A.J. Brown. just going into a far more run-focused offense with, the guys in the backfield, particularly Jalen Hurts. But again, much like we just talked about Devontae Adams, they got him. They paid a big price to get him. They paid him the money. You don't do that to not give him the football. So and
he's tight with the quarterback. He's tight with Jalen Hurts too, right? So very much similar. It's a very similar situation to Devontae Adams.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's coming there for a reason. But at the bottom, both Terry McLaurin, Deontay Johnson's unbelievable. The guy's so reliable. Whether it's Mitch Trubisky or Kenny Pickett, I think that, it might take a year or so for him to get back to that spot. But again, we're talking about the top 20. Let me ask you a question. Because, and I just sort of, I guess, answered part of this in that Travis Kelce is not in this list, and we'll talk about tight ends in a minute. But I think we all realize Patrick Mahomes will be at worst top 3, top 4 quarterback this year. It'll pass for 40, 50 touchdowns and 4,000, 5,000 yards. No Chiefs receivers in here. Who's your number 1 Chiefs receiver, and how close is he to getting into that top 20? Is it Juju?
Yeah, it would be Juju. Nothing against Sky Moore, who in the Dynasty League, obviously a lot of people will be targeting. Sure. And once we kind of get a feel for exactly what he brings to the table, I mean, his value is probably going to go up like crazy. But it would be Juju. And Juju, I mean, I haven't been drafting a lot of Juju so far, but I have him probably in the 24 to 27 range. I think just monster season coming for Travis Kelce. I think Patrick Mahomes is going to just have a massive, and we already has a massive connection with Travis Kelce, but the focus will be even more this year on getting the ball to Travis Kelce. And we know Juju's got the skill package to step up and be that, but is he going to be a true wide receiver 1 and work his way into the top 12? I mean, I guess if things really connect there, maybe, but I think right now it's just too early for me to kind of single out any of those guys to think that they could, not be the Tyreek Hill for Patrick Mahomes, but maybe a poor man's Tyreek Hill. And they brought in some of those other guys, right? So there's some options there. I just don't like any of them enough to put them in the top 20, which might be crazy when we do. I mean, you love Patrick Mahomes this year. I really like Patrick Mahomes this year. I just think monster season for Travis Kelce, and the rest kind of sorts itself out.
Yeah, DJ Moore's another guy that we should mention. Interesting, Laviska Shenault getting traded from the Jags to the Panthers for another weapon. I mean, things just, for whatever reason, didn't work out with him. He was a guy many of us were high on last year and really disappointed. But everyone in Jacksonville disappointed last year. I thought they'd run it back and see if they, under Doug Peterson, could do better. Obviously, they're thinking differently, and other guys will get those options there. To me, DJ Moore's still a clear-cut, and to be honest, I think almost undervalued because of just what a clear-cut number 1 target he is. Obviously, you've got McCaffrey, who's going to get tons of touches, but DJ Moore is a guy, especially in a PPR league, that I think gets a ton of attention. And, I mean, the Bengals, there's a reason why we like, Burrow and Herbert for fantasy quarterback-wise. I mean, you look, 2 of their receivers are both in this list. But a player like DJ Moore is so clearly the number 1. And I'll tell you what, I'm high on Baker. I think Baker has a real FU season. I don't think the division is particularly strong outside of Tampa. And I think Carolina, I'm on Carolina. We talked about it in the lock shop last week. I'm on the over for their total wins. And I think he'll be a big, big part of it. But I got to tell you, anybody in that Washington offense makes me worry, even though I think Terry McLaurin is so skilled. He might need to wait to get a real QB in there and to really get the most out of him and have you be confident to throw him in as your WR2 each and every week.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out for Terry McLaurin because of that quarterbacking situation. I was just looking at where some of these guys finished last year in points per game, specifically the Chargers guys, just to see if it is sustainable to have 2 guys finish in the top 12. And last year, Keenan Allen averaged 16.1 fantasy points per game, which was good for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Basically 11th among wide receivers that I would qualify having enough points. And Mike Williams was 13th at 15.4 points per game. So, and you also have T. Higgins at 15.7 and Jamar Chase at 17.9. And I think Mike Evans and Chris Godwin were healthy. We're both in there as well. So it certainly is sustainable for some of these teams that love to pass the football. Like the Eagles, they're not going to deliver 2 top 15 position players, right? Maybe one in A.J. Brown. But Brady's going to throw the ball. Herbert's going to throw the ball. Burrow's going to throw the ball. And he's got the talent to go out and get it. So I like those Chargers guys. I just did a draft on Saturday, and I took Mike Williams and added him to who do I have for receiver in that league? CeeDee Lamb and I have another guy. So I took Mike Williams basically as my wide receiver 3 in flex, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And Pittman. I've got Pittman, CeeDee Lamb, Mike Williams, and then I also took Chris Godwin in that draft too. And we can talk about Chris Godwin in a second when we get to some sleepers and some my guys. So that's the top 20. Huss, I mean, off this list or anybody else beyond this list, are there one or two guys that you're going into drafts here over the next week? Not to give too much away for the fantasy football extravaganza listener draft, but are there any guys that you would consider your guys that you're making sure you get your hands on?
Well, listen, it's easy to say Justin Jefferson. Although, you know what? I mean, that was a guy that I drafted a couple years ago in keeper leagues and have been able to keep him around, and he's really turned out great. There's others that haven't gone as well. And to be honest, I think that Deebo Samuel is being criminally underrated right now. I'm not sure where the narrative got that Deebo was just bound for a big turn back. And we were sort of talking about this off air, and this
he
sort
got
of
paid
touches on the quarterback side of thing as well. He got paid. And now, interestingly enough, the Niners have redone Jimmy Garoppolo's contract, and he's staying with the Niners. Of course, August 30th was the deadline where they had to cut him to avoid his contract being guaranteed. So they've worked it out. He's got a no-trade clause where I guess if they want to trade him and he wants to go somewhere, he might be able to go, and a no-tag clause. So he will be a free agent next year. And I'm just wondering, first of all, I wonder what that does to Trey Lance. I mean, you know, if Jimmy's not there, I think you're basically sinking or swimming with him. My interpretation of that from John Lynch's side of things, the Niners GM, is that they're hopeful, they're optimistic, but they're not convinced. And I think it'll be important to have Jimmy around. And the more Jimmy plays, for sure, the better it is for Deebo. You know, if they are running the football more and Lance doesn't have that same rapport with Deebo Samuel, well, first of all, maybe we get a little bit more Jimmy Garoppolo, but it could handle it. But I just think that what he did last year was so phenomenal. And I got a lot of confidence in Kyle Shanahan. Kyle Shanahan is a guy that understands, maybe as well as anyone in the league, how to get the ball into the hands of his playmakers. And to be honest, I think there'll be some teams that are copying what he did last year with Deebo Samuel. So on that list, DJ Moore's the other guy I mentioned. I think of those guys in the bottom group, I really do like them. But just before we get to my guys, Dusty, here's a couple guys that aren't cracking your top 20.
Okay.
DK Metcalf. I mean, I think we all know why that is. He's not getting Russell Wilson anymore. But I'm interested in how close he is to that group. And Jalen Waddle in Miami. I mean, as much as Tyreek Hill will come in, Tyreek's going to take double coverage on probably almost all plays. Part of me thinks that Waddle, who already was very, very productive, is the big beneficiary of Tyreek being there. Because listen, you don't want Tua trying to thread needles into double coverage, but if they're going to leave Jalen Waddle open on single coverage throughout the season, I think he eats, and be interested to see where he lives. Did either of those guys have an opportunity to maybe push in and around?
Waddle was right there. Like, if you want to put Waddle ahead of, I mean, I've seen him on some lists as high as like 14, 15. I'm not going to go there yet, strictly based on my lack of faith in Tua at this point. Like, Tua's got to prove to me that he can do this before I'm slotting Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle in my top 15 or 16. But he ended up being, he was the last guy on my list. He was 21. So if you want to flip Waddle in there ahead of Terry McLaurin, Allen Robinson, Deontay Johnson, I'm good with that. I don't think I would put him ahead of T. Higgins, A.J. Brown, DJ Moore, Brandon Cooks, who's just a target machine and very reliable if he can stay healthy in Houston. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's, to me, and it depends on who you talk to about McLaurin and Robinson and Deontay Johnson and stuff. And some people might say Brooke or Brandon Cooks is closer to that group than the group above him, which I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to die on that hill. But go look at what Brandon Cooks has done recently. I mean, he's been an absolute stud. So I have him up in that tier, and I wouldn't be able to move Waddle up into that group. And DK Metcalf, my goodness. I mean, part of me thinks like he's a freak, but he's a freak who I think still personally trying to learn the position a little bit. And now he's going to have to do it with some sort of combination of Geno Smith and Drew Lock. So I just drafted Tyler Lockett. I didn't even want to on Saturday, but it got to the point where Tyler Lockett was available, and I'm looking at he was 3 rounds below where his average draft position is right now. And I said to the boys, well, I don't want to, but I pretty much have to at this point. That's how much the value of these Seattle wide receivers have dropped off. So couldn't do it. Didn't even think about it with DK Metcalf in the top 20.
Well, and listen, I mean, anyone that had DK will tell you last year, even with Russell Wilson, he completely disappeared in the last 5 weeks of the season. If you had him in the playoffs, he probably lost because, I mean, you had a spot going in and he did not get it done. But back to my guys, I've got 3 guys off of this list that I think you can get relatively late that will provide really, really good value. First off is Alan Lazard. Listen, Devontae Adams is gone. We just talked about it. He had 169 targets last year. That has to go somewhere. And I think there's something to be said for the fact that he spent some more time in that offense and has some familiarity with Aaron Rodgers. And I think the trust there with Rodgers will be there before some of the younger players that might take a little while to develop. So I think considering where he's being picked right now with the quarterback, Alan Lazard is great value, and I think you can get him much later on than we're talking with a number of these guys. Rashad Bateman is the other guy.
I like Bateman too.
Listen, I'm not a huge Lamar guy. I rarely have him on any of my teams. Listen, he's great for running the football, but I mean, I don't trust him from a passing standpoint as much as many others. But beyond Mark Andrews, Rashad Bateman will clearly be the number 1 receiver, and by a lot right now, sort of like what I was talking about before with DJ Moore, how there's just simply a clear-cut number 1 guy. Andrews might take some of the targets away like a McCaffrey would from Moore, but I think Bateman proved himself last season as the guy that Lamar leans on and trusts. And I think the other guy is Christian Kirk in Jacksonville. And if you watch the preseason, he was getting a ton of looks from Trevor Lawrence. They've spent a lot of money to get him there. He is the clear-cut number 1. And listen, as much as you might think the Jags might stink, that can often be a great thing for fantasy football. Teams that are down by 2 or 3 touchdowns, they're throwing nonstop. And often the defenses will come back. I mean, just watch Christian Kirk have first halves where he's got 3 or 4 points, and then he finishes the game with 22 because he was eaten in garbage time. I think the Jags will be better than they were last year. I realize the bar is set pretty low.
Yeah.
I mean, he in particular is a guy that has an opportunity to be a real fantasy stud, even if his team isn't very good this year.
Yeah, just like sort of a combination of my guys and sleepers that I've got kind of left that we haven't talked about yet. First of all, one of my favorite wide receivers to draft this year. We've already talked about him, but Courtland Sutton. I've been taking Courtland Sutton in a lot of drafts. A month ago, I was getting him in the 5th round. That's not happening anymore. Now you kind of have to sort of swallow an early 3rd round price tag on him, but I still love him. I think he's going to do very well with Russell Wilson as his quarterback this year. So Courtland Sutton, definitely one of my guys that I've been drafting a lot. Michael Pittman, I mean, you see him. He's in my top 10. He's number 8 right now. I've been loving getting Michael Pittman. I've started a lot of drafts with Justin Jefferson, Saquon Barkley, and then one of Michael Pittman or Courtland Sutton. And I love every single one of those starts. So, Pittman and Courtland Sutton are the 2 guys on this list that I've really loved getting so far. But some guys a little bit further down. You mentioned Christian Kirk. That was another one of the guys that I like where you can get him right now. This one's very interesting because, he's coming off an injury. The reports have been pretty good, but the value on Chris Godwin in drafts right now is insane because if Chris Godwin is healthy, or even if he misses just the first couple of weeks of the season, I mean, this guy is, if he's healthy and stays healthy the whole year, he's a top 20 lock. Like, he's a top 20 lock playing with Tom Brady. And right now, I mean, in the draft I did this past weekend, I essentially got him in what would be the equivalent of our 6th round, I think. And getting Chris Godwin in the 6th round in any league is just straight up stealing the guy. So Chris Godwin's another guy that, I mean, I absolutely love right now. You can get now. I mean, I had our guys obviously let him slip a little bit, so I managed to scoop him up there. You're seeing him pretty much like as a 4th round value right now, but that's if he was coming off a healthy offseason, Chris Godwin's going late 2nd round. It's as simple as that. Him and Mike Evans be right in that same area again. So it's still, even where he's at now, it's still great value.
Well, 100%. And it's important to remember. I mean, you might say, oh, well, geez, I'm not going to be able to play him for the first few weeks of the season. And that might be the case. But it's not like you have to have him in your lineup getting 0. I mean, and there's a lot of depth at the wide receiver position. You will be able to find a guy that's got a nice matchup, a couple of your backups that can go in and keep that seat warm and keep your head above water. And then all of a sudden, when you add a healthy Chris Godwin into that Bucs offense that's so passing centric and focused around Brady, you're talking about a guy when healthy that's guaranteed top 15. You could make the argument that he's top 10 as well. In the meantime, though, Mike Evans, certainly the clear-cut number 1 for Tampa, and Mike Evans back into the top 10 after last year sort of being out because who do you want? Do you want Evans? Do you want Godwin? Just the fact that early on this season, it should be all about Mike Evans makes him a top 10 receiver, but don't sleep on Godwin. When he's in, he is as good as most in the NFL.
One other guy that I think has some pretty good sleeper value right now, if you want to consider it that, depending on how deep your draft is Chris Olave of the Saints. I mean, by all accounts so far, first of all, he's a deep ball guy. And even if their whole receiving core is healthy, Michael Thomas, not necessarily deep ball guy. Jarvis Landry, not necessarily a deep ball guy. Jameis Winston, a quarterback who doesn't mind throwing it deep. Okay, so with Chris Olave, I mean, if they connect, if it works, if they're on the same page, it could be a really nice season for Olave if he's kind of the receiver everybody thinks he is coming out of college. And like I said, the reports so far out of the Saints camp is that he's been very good. So I like Olave. I don't even know what's his ADP right now. Let me bring that up here quickly for you. 45th for Chris Olave. So, I mean, that's late in most of your home-based drafts. So, yeah, love him. Absolutely love him.
And you mentioned a guy that is persona non grata around my teams right now, and that's Michael Thomas. And I mean, I don't know how many teams he killed last year and really even the week before. It's kind of wild that he's still with the Saints. I mean, just the way that all played out, you thought that he would have been gone for sure. He's ranked, he's going in the early 30s right now. And I'll tell you what, if he's healthy and the guy that we saw a couple of years ago with Drew Brees, I mean, he's never mind top 30, top 20. I mean, he could be right there with the top receivers in the league, but what he is, you just cannot trust him right now. That being said, as a late pick, it wouldn't surprise me if he goes the exact opposite. And this is a year he has a monster year after killing fantasy owners. And there'll be a lot of people that will have him on their do not draft list. And to be honest, I'm one of them, and I know it might burn me.
Huss, anything left on wide receivers? If not, we'll slide over and take a look at these tight end tiers I've got.
You know what? I mean, all I'll say is this. There's a couple other guys that I'm very intrigued, but I can't really count on. I can't wait to see what this New York Jets offense looks like, assuming that Zach Wilson is healthy, and we'll see what Breece Hall does. But Elijah Moore? Elijah Moore is a guy that, again, could be one of those later round receivers that all of a sudden is getting a ton of football. Sounds like Denzel Mims, their second pick a couple years ago out of Baylor, is never mind, not starting, has a chance of just basically not making the team right now. I haven't checked on whether the Jets did or did not cut him, but he's not really in the picture right now. And then, listen, I know Darnell Mooney is somewhat high, and I'm sure we'll have the same conversation with Cole Kmet earlier on.
Yeah.
I'm just so low on the Bears offense overall that unless it's a guy that is going to be getting the majority of the targets, and I guess you can maybe make that argument for Mooney, I think it's a lot to put on the shoulders of Justin Fields. So that is a guy that I'm kind of away. Like, he's sitting there right there with Jerry Jeudy. I'll take Jerry Jeudy, the second wide receiver for Denver, I think, over Darnell Mooney. But be interesting to see how that all works out. Oh, by the way, you're a Detroit guy. What about Amon-Ra St. Brown? Now, that is a guy somewhat polarizing. There's a lot of people that think he's going to have a monster year, others that just don't trust the Detroit offense and Jared Goff.
Yeah, I don't think monster year would be the right way to describe it. I mean, I hope he has a monstrous year, but I just highly doubt it. I mean, his average draft position among wide receivers right now is 28th, which, to be honest with you, even as a Lions fan, I think is probably maybe just a bit too high. They did go out and they did bring in DJ Chark this year. Last year there really wasn't anybody else. At least this year there's another body. The one thing that these guys have going for them, we had Jared Goff in that crypto-based 32-team league last year. He was our quarterback. And he had a pretty decent year because they're just getting crushed all the time. And Goff's putting up a ton of garbage numbers, and then somehow, some way, we ended up trading Jared Goff in that league this year in a deal for Justin Fields, which is just in a dynasty-based league. We were like, what? We got to take it. So we were pretty happy with that. But, I mean, if Detroit's a little bit better and they're not behind that much, maybe none of these numbers get to where people expect them to be. And we talked about it on one of our other previews that we think Detroit will at least be somewhat more respectable this year than they have been in the past. So to be honest with you, where he's going, buddy, I'm trying to think of all the drafts I've done, and I know I'm a Lions fan, and I'm talking dozens and dozens and like hundreds of mocks, but already well over a dozen real drafts. I don't think I have him anywhere. So, I mean, I'm going to miss out big time if he hits.
Well, one other guy just before we get to tight ends, and I guess this is actually maybe a good little transition into the tight ends because his tight end is on this list. Talked a lot about how high I am about Adams, but if you like Devontae Adams is going to get tons, you would think Darren Waller's also there. I do wonder what this means for Hunter Renfrow, in that, let's face it, Josh McDaniels is coming from New England. I mean, from the Bill Belichick. I mean, think of what they did with those little shifty, good route running receivers like Wes Welker, like Danny Amendola in the past. He proved to be one of the most reliable receivers in the league last year.
Yeah.
The guy catches everything. He runs great routes. He's not going to be the big play threat, but in a PPR format where quantity of catches is significant, you're going to see Hunter Renfrow going in and around like the early 40s. In a PPR format, we'll see what happens with the touchdowns. No matter what happens with those other guys, he's the safety blanket on third down. He's got a great rapport with Carr. He's a guy that I think is maybe being undervalued a little bit, much like he's frankly been his entire career.
He last year averaged 15.2 points per game, right behind Adam Thielen, Jalen Waddle, and Mike Williams. And because of Adams and because of a healthy Waller, and I think we had a comment earlier. Yeah, Edmonton Raider says on the live stream, he said, Renfrow is going to benefit from a healthy Waller and Devontae. He's going to finish wide receiver 20 or better. Love your faith in the guy. I mean, he might benefit a bit, but there was nobody else to throw the ball to last year when he was doing what he was doing, right? So I think you made some good points. Like, there'll be opportunities for him to be effective, and I'm sure he'll have some very good games, but targets are going to Devontae Adams. Targets are going to Darren Waller this year, so it might be a little more difficult for him to do it, but from an efficiency level, he might be able to do that a lot of nights and come away with some good numbers. So, and right now he's being drafted for a guy who was up with some of those other guys last year. His average draft position right now, let me track it down. It's way down. There's 35th among wide receivers right now, according to Fantasy Pros. So that's something that certainly has to get taken care of. But it is a transition to tight ends. You want to head over there right now, or?
Yeah. Just finishing up on Hunter Renfrow. I mean, regardless of how much they go to Adams and even Waller as well, nothing is going to change that Renfrow is that guy that will go in, pick up those soft spots. I mean, if they're killing a team and they can get 25 yards a pass, okay, fine, they won't go to him. But I think you can count on him to be as consistent a receiver as there is, with target share, with number of catches, probably not a ton of touchdowns. But again, in a PPR league, it is very key to note that if it's non-PPR, he drops way down as much as maybe any player. But I think McDaniels will use him and listen, build off what he built last year. And he got a big contract too. I mean, he's a legit NFLer. He's not just the Clemson guy that they picked up in the 7th round that was a feel-good story. He is a guy. But well, let's get to the tight ends right now. We can't talk with receivers. I mean, tight end is such a unique position. And to me, it's the scarcity of elite top tight ends that makes for some very, very difficult decisions early on in drafts. And I'm sure probably you could talk to it more than me, Dusty, with the amount of drafts you've been in. We're seeing Kelsey go off the board at times. I mean, like end of the first round.
Yeah, late first. Most of the drafts I'm in, buddy, Travis Kelce's gone by the end of the first round.
Absolutely. And then in the second round, you're seeing at least 2 more go off the table. And essentially, if you're in a 12-team league, there's 4 or 5 guys that are going to have a stud, a reliable week in and week out tight end. And then everybody else is just trying to figure it out and get a guy that can come in and do it. And it can be a big, big advantage for you if you're able to supplement your other positions and don't fall off too much on that. And, you know, we've talked about Kelsey. Needless to say, I'm big on Kelsey this year, especially with the loss of Tyreek Hill. I think he becomes even more important. But tell me, Mark Andrews, how close is he to Kelsey, and how Kyle Pitts fits in with a terrible team without Matt Ryan, with Marcus Mariota, to get into that top tier of the top 3 tight ends.
Yeah, Pitts is just a phenomenal talent. I mean, there's nobody else there. It's like they just don't have anybody else. So Pitts is going to be an absolute target monster this year. Just watch this guy play football. Watch the way he moves, man. He looks like, to me, like when I watch this guy play, he looks like Calvin Johnson. I mean, he's listed as a tight end, but he looks like Calvin Johnson. He's an absolute freak. So that's why I do have him up in that tier. Travis Kelce, I am comfortable taking. I'm laughing. Let's say if I'm drafting 11th, I'm considering Kelsey at 11 anyway. And if he's still there at 14 when he's coming back around second round, it's your lucky day. Like, it's not going to happen very often. Mark Andrews, I haven't drafted a lot of Mark Andrews because I love so many wide receivers that are still around in the second round. But in pretty much, I'd say 98% of the drafts that I've done so far, Kelsey has gone in round 1. Andrews has gone in round 2. Pitts is usually gone early in round 3. And then you get a mix of your Kittles and your Schultzes. Kittle usually at the top of that list. Waller not far behind. I've got Schultz ahead of him a little bit there just because I don't think there's as much target, as many targets for Darren Waller maybe as there will be for Dalton Schultz, simply because we've seen Dallas use their tight ends way more than they should when they had all that wide receiver talent. Now they don't have all that wide receiver talent. I would think Schultz is targeted even more this year. So, I mean, Kittle would be at the top of this second tier. I don't know if I have much wiggle room, to be honest with you, because maybe there should be another tier break between 6 and 7, and it's Kittle, Schultz, and Waller together, and Goddard and Hawkinson kind of in their own tier, and then Kmet, Ertz, Dawson Knox, and Freiermuth near the end. I like getting any of those top 10. You used to be able to wait and get Cole Kmet super late. You kind of can't do that anymore in the overall scheme of things. Like, I'm talking like last round, not the case anymore. You're going to have to get him in probably the 9th or 10th, which you're still okay with, which is why I love the tight end strategy. And I've seen times where all 3 of those guys, Kelsey, Andrews, and Pitts, will go in the top 2 rounds. And as a guy who doesn't mind waiting on tight end, I love that because that bounces down RBs and wide receivers that usually wouldn't be there for me. So of those 3, I do find myself taking Travis Kelce much more than Andrews and Pitts, but I do think it's a clear-cut top tier.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I'd say those are the top 3 guys. And again, this sort of goes back to our conversation about Debo and the Niners offense. I think there's a little bit more question. Like, Kittle's unbelievable, but if it's Trey Lance all year, will he be as good as getting him the football as Jimmy's been in the past? Will he have that same opportunity? I'm not sure. And Dalton Schultz, I'm with you. I think he goes up big time because of just the need for the targets. I mean, outside of CeeDee Lamb, as you mentioned, I did see a funny NFL film sidelight thing of Dak Prescott. The Cowboys were playing the Falcons, and Dak Prescott was talking like almost like if you're looking at a gorgeous girl talking about how hot she is about Pitts on Atlanta, but he was saying it to Dalton Schultz, and Schultz was just sort of sitting there looking sort of, it'd be like if your wife was talking about how hot some guy is while she's sitting there with you. So I think he's got something proven. He's in a great position right now. To me, outside of those guys, I'm a little less high on Hawkinson. Very nervous. I mentioned the Bears offense. I'm not sure you can count on those guys. Dallas Goedert, to me, is in a great position. Ertz has moved on, clear number one, and I think that offense is definitely going to involve a lot of tight end. And the guy that I would have higher, that if we want to talk about my guys outside of the top, is Dawson Knox. Listen, we know how lethal that Bills offense is. And, with Diggs, I think Gabe Davis is going to be getting a lot more attention. And listen, Dawson Knox in big games, like late in the season, continued to get more and more looks from Josh Allen. I think another year being in that offense right now, although I guess they do have a new OC with Daboll moving over to the Giants, but I'm high on Dawson Knox. And obviously, when you got a quarterback like Josh Allen and an offense that is expected to score the amount of points that Buffalo is, to me, Knox is definitely in the top 10, knocking on 7 or 8 behind Dallas Goedert for me.
Ooh, wow. You like it. So that's really good value on Dawson Knox then this year for you.
Oh, for sure.
Right?
For
You're not going to have to take him in that 6-7 spot. But if he can get up to the 6-7 spot for you, you're laughing. And you're right. Physically, I mean, he's a complete package. That's for sure. I mean, I don't think there's any denying that. Outside of him, I mean, I don't love Freiermuth. I had to have somebody in at 12. I don't mind the top 11. But yeah, outside of that, there's really not a lot moving the needle for me at the tight end position. And I don't really like moving super early on tight end. So kind of got that small window in there where I would try to take Dallas Goedert or TJ Hawkinson in like round 7 or 8 if they're still kicking around, which I don't mind at that point. If you're starting 3 wide receivers, 3 running backs, then you get into a tight end and maybe a quarterback after that. A couple of questions here. This is an interesting question from Zinner 2.1. Do you guys think stacking Kelsey and Pitts is a viable strategy from the 5 spot in drafts? And I'll say this, in a tight end premium league, and I am in a few tight end premium leagues, I mean, I don't hate that. I also don't love it. But in a regular league, the 5 spot's just too high. The 5 spot's just too high to do that. I mean, if you want to try to stack Mark Andrews and Kyle Pitts in late 2nd, early 3rd or something like that, that might be a little bit more reasonable. As much as I love Travis Kelce, I think the highest I've taken him in any mock or anything this year was probably like 8th, and that was just to kind of see how my team would come together if I did decide to draft Travis Kelce at 8. But yeah, 5's too high. I mean, at that point, if you can get Justin Jefferson at 5, I'm taking Justin Jefferson at 5. If Jefferson's gone, I'd probably consider Cooper Kupp at 5. So I just can't go Kelce that high, Huss. Plus, I have trouble with the stacks because you just never know how desperate people are going to be to trade for that one guy. Like, that's what you're hoping, right? You're hoping you can cash in and some guy gets desperate and you trade Kyle Pitts to get Jamar Chase, and then you got Chase and Kelce, 2 first-round values, and sometimes it doesn't work out that way and it comes back to bite you in the ass.
It's a great theory, but it's much harder to pull off in practice. I mean, how many guys that are, taking, I mean, you're essentially picking another guy in the 2nd round. So the object would be to trade that guy for someone that's already gone. And I hate to tell you, most of those guys that are picking guys in the 1st round, they're doing it for a reason. They could have had that guy in the first place. And, only if they get into a situation where they're really screwed and maybe they just have an incredible surplus of great wideouts or running backs, you're in that position. But I will say this, try not to be the guy that takes the last tight end off the board, because if you're in a 12-team league and you're all of a sudden then sitting there thinking about Pat Freiermuth or Hunter Henry or Irv Smith, I think that can be a black hole in your lineup. In the past, there was enough guys that I think you could feel pretty confident that you could get a guy that would be competent. With the explosion of great talented wide receivers in so many markets, there's just not enough tight ends, and that's why the scarcity of the position is dictating that many of these guys are going earlier than we've seen in a long time.
All right, before we wrap up one more time, let's remind all of you, you still have time to get into the Fantasy Football Extravaganza Podcast Listener League. All right, all you have to do is send us an email somehow, some way convincing us that you deserve one of the 10 spots. It's a 12-man league. Huss and I are in it. We're going to do it with 10 of you. If you would like to get a spot in that league, and what is on the line here, I don't have the football ring, but I showed this earlier. This is my buddy J-Rod's hockey ring. I forgot to take to him, so I'm going to have to ship it. But this bad boy right here is going to be on the line. Something just like this. These things are absolutely beautiful. The bling is insane. You'll get your name on the side. We'll have the FFE league on the other side. So yeah, this is something that you can wear. One night I went to the bar, I took off my wedding ring, and I put this on just to show it off. It was amazing because I'm married to both my wife and fantasy football, Huss.
Yes, you definitely are. I'll be honest. I'm so jacked to hear this. I knew you did that last year, but I didn't know that was in effect. This league has all of a sudden rocketed to my most important league of many this year because I want that bling. There's nothing better than to be able to stun. I've got one league where the guys do a big title belt, like a wrestling belt, which is cool. But this is the sort of thing that you can casually just throw the hand on the bar and wait for people to ask you questions about it and then talk about how amazing your fantasy team was last year, which is obviously everyone's favorite topic. Hear how other people's teams are.
A belt like this?
Yes.
Right here?
Yes, Dustin.
Yes. I've won this. This is our Juan Rincon Hockey League Champion League belt. 5th victory in 11 years for me. Coming back to the Nielsen household. These things are sweet too, buddy. Not going to lie. Yeah.
How about the self-confidence we have actually putting this out in public, how into fantasy we are. Like, we're not nerds, folks. We're well-adjusted adults. But, this just happens to be a big love of ours.
Yeah. Join us in the listener league. All right. Be just like us. Slide into my DMs with why you should get in or fire me an email, dnielsenmedia@gmail.com. As for the Lock Shop goes, you will see another episode probably on Friday as we continue to get you ready for the National Football League season. If you're watching this or listening to this and you missed our earlier episode today, obviously laying out Labor Day weekend in the Canadian Football League, make sure you track that down as well. Huss has been on a heater, 7-1 in the last 2 weeks in the CFL, so trying to keep that rolling again. And next week's episode should be fun if we can pull it off. We'll be doing our Fantasy Football Extravaganza podcast draft while we're doing the episode, breaking down the draft. So I really look forward to that one, buddy. That should be good.
Yeah, no, it is going to be unreal. And Friday's Lock Shop, folks, maybe my favorite one of the year. And really it ties into a lot of what we've been talking about for the Fantasy Football Extravaganza is individual player props. The guys that were the highest on, some overs, some values on unders, some overinflated players. There is some great opportunities and money to be made. And God knows we spent enough time getting ready for these fantasy drafts. We've got projections. We can compare that to the lines that the bookies are making. And we'll go through all the cool bet lines with our favorite picks and fades for player props before kickoff next week.
That'll do it for another episode of the Lock Shop's Fantasy Football Extravaganza. As always, brought to you by our wonderful partners at Coolbet. If you're not yet signed up for an account, do so today. What are you waiting for? Use the code LOCKSHOP when you sign up so they know we sent you. Huss, we'll talk to you later in the week, buddy.
Happy drafting, folks.